This video contains additional information relevant to scanning slides on the SlideSnap Pro, as promised near the end of the first instructional video about that device. However, some material in this video will be relevant to all types of scanning, not just slides. Furthermore, while some patrons may find this entire video relevant to their concerns, others may find only selected topics pertinent to them. For this reason, the first slide of this video is a table of contents showing the topics covered herein, including the approximate times at which each section begins. Although some users may choose to view only those sections of particular interest to them, others may find that watching the entire video acquaints them with topics whose relevance was not obvious to them beforehand. This first diagram provides a simplified comparison of the process by which image data is captured in a camera-based scanner versus a traditional flatbed or document feeding scanner. Some of the information that follows in this video may be easier to understand if users keep this diagram in mind. Specifically, a camera-based scanner like the SlideSnap Pro relies on a digital camera to transform the image seen through its lens into a computer file containing data needed to recreate the image on a monitor or in a print. Note that the PC computer application that controls the camera, in this case Smart Shooter, does not place the digital image data into the file. Rather, the camera's own software places the image data into a file and sends that file to the computer application, which stores it on the hard drive without altering it, except to automatically assign the name of the file according to user preference. Besides receiving and storing the image file, the Smart Shooter program, like other PC software tethering applications, is responsible for adjusting many of the camera's settings prior to commanding the camera to take photos. As mentioned in the prior video on SlideSnap Pro, most camera settings within the Smart Shooter program should remain unaltered by users from their default values. In contrast to this method of image capture, the digital image from a flatbed or document feeding scanner is assembled into a file by the PC computer software controlling the device, which then stores the file on disk. This explains the differences in file types available from flatbed scanners versus camera-based scanners. Computer software for a flatbed scanner usually allows saving images in more file formats than a camera-based scanner, which typically offers only JPEG format, in addition to one other format known as RAW file found in expensive cameras. For example, the file format known as TIFF, an alternative to the more common JPEG format, is only offered for images from flatbed scanners, not cameras. However, this is not as big a drawback for the slide scanner as it might seem, since its Nikon camera can save images as RAW files that can be converted into TIFF files on our computers, which will be demonstrated later. RAW files contain as much, if not more, image information than TIFF files, so no quality loss occurs in this transformation. In fact, those familiar with RAW files understand that they actually permit a wider range of image adjustment after image capture than do TIFF or JPEG files. Since we have broached the topic of file formats, we delve a little deeper into the JPEG format, which is the most popular format for images. As many of you know, JPEG incorporates a type of image data compression that significantly reduces the size of the file, in exchange for a slight decrease in image quality obtained after the data is automatically decompressed by whichever program opens the JPEG file for viewing or printing. Degradation in image quality is the reason that this process is called lossy compression, meaning that some quality is sacrificed in order to obtain a smaller file size. However, this loss of image quality is often so slight as to be unnoticeable by most viewers, even when comparing the JPEG image to the identical image that was saved first as a TIFF file, which does not typically involve lossy compression. Note that an optional lossless compression used in some TIFF files will not lower image quality at all, but then the reduction in file size achieved by this compression is not always impressive, as size reduction varies greatly with image characteristics. Returning to the main topic of the JPEG compression, note that the reduction in file size compared to a TIFF file can be very significant, sometimes more than a tenfold decrease in file size. In fact, the amount of compression, and hence the loss of quality, is set in software before the captured image is saved as a JPEG file. Once the image has been saved as a JPEG, it is too late to go back and save as higher quality, since information has already been sacrificed upon initial compression and saving. Of course, nothing prevents users from resaving copies of JPEG images at higher compression, that is, lower quality, than used in original capture in order to get smaller files for emailing, etc. Most users should not be scared away from using the JPEG file format because of this mention of information lost. The patented algorithm that compresses the image data into the JPEG file is very sophisticated in that it uses mathematical transformations to achieve smaller file size, generally without noticeable loss in image quality after the image is reconstituted from the file, at least for reasonable amounts of size reduction, that is, compression. Note that JPEG compression is not throwing away selected pixels of the image, which would reduce the resolution or number of pixels of the image. To illustrate how users of SlideSnap can choose the amount of JPEG compression, as well as the final resolution of the images to be saved afterwards, consider the parameter called quality in the Smart Shooter program that controls the Nikon camera. A pull-down menu displays an intimidating list of choices, some of which are demonstrated now. The complexity arises because this single menu presents various combinations of 3 different parameters for each menu choice in the list. Let us consider 2 of those 3 parameters now. One parameter is the amount of JPEG compression, which also affects file size and image quality as well. The 3 levels of quality are called fine, normal, and basic, which refer to little compression, modest compression, and most compression, respectively. The second parameter is the resolution of the image to be stored, which dictates how many pixels are stored and hence the file size and image quality. The choice called large means the full resolution of the camera, which is 6,000 by 4,000 pixels. The second choice, called medium, recalculates the image into fewer pixels, that is, 4496 by 3,000 pixels. The lowest file size and quality come from choosing small, which represents the image as 2992 by 2,000 pixels. Obviously, the largest file size and highest quality come from choosing the combination of fine and large. At the other end of the spectrum is basic and small. Although both resolution and compression affect file size, those seeking small file size may be most satisfied with results obtained from leaving resolution at its full value and increasing the amount of compression. However, users are free to experiment with different combinations of these 2 parameters to find their preference, but are requested to revert this menu item back to normal large before quitting the program, leaving that as the default for the next user. Simple cameras, like the one used in our book scanner manufactured by CZUR, do not have user controls to change the amount of JPEG compression and/or resolution of the stored image. Its software sets a reasonable compromise between size reduction and image quality. Of course, users may downgrade the quality and size of their files in post-processing if they wish, though few would likely want to do so. However, users wanting the ultimate level of quality may choose to save images in the TIFF file format, which in typical usage does not employ lossy compression. An optional lossless compression is available with TIFF, but it doesn't change image quality at all, though the size reduction ranges between modest and none at all. The advantage of TIFF over JPEG is that TIFF files can be edited and resaved many times without any loss of quality, other than that caused by whatever editing procedures were used. JPEG files, on the other hand, would show a gradual reduction in quality if they are repeatedly edited and resaved. Note that it is not the viewing of JPEG files that reduces their quality. A file viewed the 1,000th time is identical to the file's first view, nor does making identical copies of JPEG files reduce their quality. It is only by editing JPEG files, that is, cropping, color correcting, etc., do they lose quality with each recompression upon resaving. This chart summarizes this comparison of JPEG versus TIFF file formats. The characteristics mentioned are file size, image quality, effect of multiple resaves, and compatibility with other programs. Finally, to illustrate the effect of JPEG's lossy compression on image quality, the next slide compares 3 different levels of compression. The full image is shown on the left, with enlargements of the center portion of the photo shown to the right for low, medium, and high compression, respectively. Note that the artifacts, that is, image defects, associated with JPEGs are most noticeable in the example of extreme compression on the bottom right, although they are also present to a lesser degree in files compressed less severely, like the middle image on the right. For this reason, some people choose to save images as TIFF files, which does not use lossy compression, as previously mentioned. Those that do save images as JPEG files will probably want to save them at fairly high level of quality. But since the Nikon camera on the SlideSnap Pro does not allow saving TIFF files directly, how can its scanned images end up as TIFF files? Of course, an image processing program could resave JPEG files as TIFF files, but that has no real advantage, since each TIFF file would inherit whatever artifacts were introduced upon the original save as JPEG. The solution is to save the images as Nikon RAW files and later convert them into TIFF files. Note that RAW formats are unique to each brand of camera, meaning that Nikon RAW files are not the same as Canon RAW files, Olympus RAW files, etc. Nikon RAW files carry the extension of .NEF, which differs from the extensions of other manufacturers' RAW files. It is perhaps convenient to think of RAW files as digital negatives, which must be developed by a computer application suitable for processing that type of RAW file. One such application is the free software IrfanView, installed on our library's PCs, that can process RAW files from SlideSnap's Nikon camera, as well as RAW files from other prominent camera brands. Although IrfanView can do many other tasks for images, the demonstration that follows shortly covers only the process of converting Nikon's RAW files into TIFF files. Processing programs allow users a wide range of common image adjustments as part of the image development, but we will not discuss those adjustments except to mention one example on the following slide. If the original image was seriously over or underexposed, very unlikely in the SlideSnap, a RAW file can produce a much better looking image in the hands of skilled users than a badly exposed image originally saved in any other format, including JPEG and TIFF. This example shows an original camera photo that was seriously underexposed. By post-processing the RAW file of this image to correct for this underexposure through a process known as brightening, the resulting image looks remarkably good, almost as good as if the image were properly exposed in the first place. On the other hand, if the RAW file was first converted into a JPEG file and then brightened, the result is not nearly as good as the corrected RAW file, though it is still an improvement over the original image. The superiority of RAW files also applies to correcting the effects of overexposure as well, though this is not demonstrated here. Because the inferior exposure correction from the JPEG file is due to issues other than its compression algorithm, we would expect a poorly exposed TIFF file to also produce mediocre results after correction. This is just one example of the advantages of RAW files over all of the file types, which will not be discussed any further here. Note that this situation applies to original camera photos, not to correcting scanned images from badly exposed slides. In the latter case, there is limited ability to digitally mitigate poor exposure that occurred back when the slide was originally taken. We now return to the discussion of how to capture slide images in the RAW format and then post-process those into TIFF files. In order to capture images in the RAW file format, change the quality setting on the left-hand side of the Smart Shooter program from our default of JPEG Normal Large to RAW before any images are captured. This is the third parameter mentioned earlier, although it is listed first on each menu choice. Users can save images as RAW, JPEG, or both file types together. Since JPEG files contain no information that is not already present in the RAW files, why might a user want to record both a RAW file and a JPEG file of each image? The answer lies in the fact that very few programs can display the image from a RAW file until after it is developed into a universally recognized file type like TIFF. So as an interim measure, JPEG files that accompany RAW files show users what the images contain in order to decide which ones to develop and which ones to discard. After developing RAW files into TIFFs or JPEGs, users may choose to discard the original JPEG files if they wish. Once the RAW files from the Nikon camera are stored on the PC's hard drive, they can be opened, that is developed, in IrfanView and resaved as TIFF files. In the example shown here, a RAW file, denoted by the NEF extension, is opened from IrfanView or whatever other Nikon RAW developing program you might have at home. Note that if you previously had chosen to save slide images in both RAW and JPEG formats, be careful not to accidentally open the JPEG file instead of the RAW file if you want the best quality for your TIFF, since both file types will be present in the PC's folder. In choosing this Save As menu, the base file name defaults to the base name of the file you opened. It will not overwrite your original raw file because the extension will be different for the file you are about to save. You might need to navigate to the folder where the raw file was located, as the program remembers the last folder used for saving, which may or may not be the location of the raw file that you opened. Of course, if you want your TIFF file saved somewhere other than the raw file folder, choose that instead. Underneath File Name is the Save As Type drop-down menu, from which you select TIFF. At this point, a TIFF Save Options screen appears at the upper right. Under Compression Options, choose either None or LZW, the latter being the name of the lossless compression mentioned earlier. Definitely do not choose JPEG compression, as we want highest quality. The last two boxes should also remain checked. Note that even the appearance of the option to use JPEG compression in a TIFF file may confuse users who think of JPEG as a file type. The fact is, JPEG is a compression algorithm that is used in all JPEG file types, but it is also available as a compression option in some other file types, including TIFF. We certainly don't want the optional JPEG compression used for our TIFF files. On the right-hand side of the TIFF options box is a heading relevant to black and white photos. This is not relevant to most users, as will be explained in the next section discussing color and grayscale images. After hitting Save, the TIFF file should appear almost immediately. The prior procedure to convert one raw file into a TIFF file seems prohibitively time-consuming for many files, which is why OrphanView offers a batch processing option to convert all your raw files at the same time. This is now demonstrated. Open the OrphanView application and select the drop-down menu under File. Instead of choosing Open like we did before for a single file, choose Batch Conversion/Rename. This immediately opens the screen shown here. Make sure that the button for batch conversion is selected near the upper left. Then open the drop-down menu for output format and choose TIFF near the bottom. Notice that unlike choosing the TIFF format for converting a single file, this action does not automatically open the TIFF options window. You must do so manually as shown here. Make sure that the compression option is selected as either None or LZW according to your preference, and that the two square boxes at the bottom are checked. Note that they are not relevant in most conversions, but it's probably best to leave them checked just the same. After closing the options box by clicking OK, make sure that the Use Advanced Options box is not selected. Users are free to explore those options on their own for the many other types of modifications that can be made during the conversion process. Now navigate to the folder containing all the raw files you wish to convert in this batch. In the drop-down menu for Files of Type, be sure to select All Files to ensure that the Nikon raw files are displayed. For reasons we won't delve into, the drop-down menu does not have a selection to display only NEF files, nor will choosing raw file type from the menu work for us either. Only the All Files choice will do. Select all of the files ending in .nef that you want converted, and not any other file types that may be present in the same folder. For this reason, it may prove helpful to store other file types, like those previously converted into TIFF files, into another folder, as will be demonstrated shortly. Now hit the Add button, not the Add All button, which would add all of the files regardless of whether you had selected them in the list. Of course, if your intention is to convert every file in the list, and there are no files present in the folder besides NEF files, then you may skip the previous step of selecting files and just hit Add All instead of Add. Now all files that are scheduled for conversion in the batch will appear in the list of input files seen at the bottom right. The last step before processing the batch is to decide where to place the converted TIFF files. The program does not automatically choose the same folder as where the input files reside unless the previous user of OrphanView had so chosen. Our recommendation, though, is to create a folder, or use one that already exists, immediately subordinate to the input file folder to hold the output files, that is, the TIFF files created during batch conversion. In this example, I previously created a folder called TIFFs in the same folder as the raw files. So now I use the Browse button under the Output folder to navigate to the same folder to specify it as the destination for converted files, thus keeping them separate from the raw files. Hitting the Start Batch button begins the conversion into TIFF files, whose completion is then indicated by a window that you can exit via the lower right-hand button. When I open the folder called TIFFs, all the converted files are seen here. Finally, we show how OrphanView can be used to develop these same Nikon RAW files into JPEGs instead of TIFF files. This would be done if a user wanted images as JPEGs but originally quoted them as RAW only, or wasn't happy with the JPEGs from the camera that were saved along with the RAW files. Perhaps the camera's JPEGs were compressed more than desired, so this is a chance to redo that process. Since it was stated earlier that no benefit arises from converting an existing JPEG into a JPEG of higher quality, that is not what is going to be demonstrated here. We will use OrphanView to open a RAW file, not a JPEG file, and then create a JPEG with the desired amount of compression. This procedure uses all the same steps shown earlier in converting RAW Nikon files, either in batch mode or one at a time, except for specifying the output type as TIFF. Since we want JPEG files, instead we choose that selection from the drop-down menu. Be careful not to select JP2, which is short for JPEG 2000, an updated JPEG standard whose alleged benefits have not led to widespread usage compared to the original JPEG standard. The options window presents a formidable set of choices, the most important of which is the slider that adjusts quality of the saved image, that is, the amount of compression. Moving the slider to the right saves a higher quality image but with less compression, resulting in a larger file. Moving left lowers the quality but results in a smaller file. Don't spend time trying to interpret the exact meaning of the numerical value shown, which ranges from 1 to 100 in this software program. Note that other programs may use different quality designations, like Nikon's camera giving only 3 possibilities, stated as fine, medium, and basic. Just remember that higher numbers mean better quality and larger files, while lower numbers mean the reverse. The first checkbox offers to save as a progressive JPEG, which is an alternative way of encoding image data so that a blurry image appears very quickly upon viewing and gradually improves in clarity as the algorithm finishes decompressing the image data. A non-progressive JPEG, called a baseline or standard JPEG, shows full clarity of the partial image as it is reconstructed from the file data, but only achieves a full image after completion. Progressive JPEGs are most useful for images placed in websites, so we will leave it unchecked. Since we have color slides, we don't check the box to convert to grayscale upon saving as JPEG. The box for chroma color subsampling invokes an additional method to reuse file size upon save, so we will not disable it. There is no harm in keeping the next 4 boxes checked because including this information adds very little to file size. Of course, for slides there is little information of importance except perhaps the date and time of scanning. The box for Try to Save with Original JPEG Quality is irrelevant since our originals are RAW files. Leave the box for Reset EXIF Orientation tag unchecked. The box for Set File Size is an interesting choice. If this is checked, the program ignores the value of save quality that was set at the top, which is why it is now grayed out. Instead, the program automatically selects whatever level of compression and hence quality is needed to achieve the desired file size you specify in this box to the right. For example, if I wanted all my JPEG files to be approximately 1 megabyte each, then check the box and enter 1000 since 1000 kilobytes is roughly 1 megabyte. Otherwise, leave the box unchecked, the number can stay though, and the program will compress with a quality of 80, resulting in whatever file size occurs. The rest of the dialog box relates to saving files as GIFs, so we can ignore those settings. Now that the JPEG options are set, we may begin conversion either one at a time as shown here, or in batch mode. In this section, we explain geometric edits to images. Although many types of sophisticated geometric adjustments can be obtained in various software programs on the market, we will restrict ourselves to those simple ones available within the free Auto Cropper program included with the SlideSnap Pro. As its name implies, the primary purpose of Auto Cropper is to automatically detect and remove the thin black borders that usually appear around the edges of scanned slide images. These borders represent a small portion of the slide mount that holds the film. They appear because the SlideSnap has been adjusted purposely to view slightly more of the slide than the actual film it holds, in order to ensure that none of the image is accidentally cropped out of the scan due to slight variability in how each slide drops into position within the Kodak projector. While some patrons don't mind seeing black borders around their images, others prefer to remove them using AutoCropper. This program automatically detects the location of the borders and resaves the image after cropping them out, subject to user-selectable parameters. To accomplish this, from the desktop or taskbar, open the icon called SSP AutoCropper, where its few program settings can be examined and changed. As previously implied, there are other possible adjustments besides cropping, but we'll ignore those for now. First, you must decide whether to select individual photos for auto-cropping or all of the photos within a folder that you select. For this demonstration, I will select just one photo. There are two parameters that affect how aggressively the program tries to crop images. The first one is sensitivity, ranging from 0, meaning no crop, to 3 for maximum sensitivity to black borders in the image to be cropped. To start, use a normal sensitivity of 2 and adjust in later retries if necessary. The program works by first automatically identifying the location of the boundary between the edge of the usable image and the black border around it. In most cases, this is fairly easy to do. But if the photo itself has very dark regions near the border, this can confuse the auto-detect algorithm within the program, which is why users may control this sensitivity to help the algorithm. The second parameter, called overcrop, may appear to have similar effect as the sensitivity parameter, but it is not the same. After the program detects the border based on the sensitivity setting, it then restricts the image to be kept by an additional amount, the overcrop percentage, before executing the actual crop. This is typically set to a value of 2%, which only by coincidence equals the default numeric value of sensitivity, though the latter is not a percentage number. Finally, users should always direct the program to store the cropped image in a different folder than the one containing the original image to be cropped. That prevents the original from being overwritten by the cropped image having the same file name, in case users find it necessary to redo the procedure with different parameters. Remember that there is no way to undo the cropping of an image unless the original uncropped image is preserved as an unmodified file. When all image adjustments are made to users' satisfaction, they are free to discard the original scanned images if they wish. For convenience, the recommended default is to store the cropped images in a folder called Edited that is subordinate to the location of patron images on the computer. Note that the option to move bad crops unchanged to a subfolder alerts user that the auto-crop algorithm did not detect borders with any confidence, so these images may require manual editing with a different program. This slide compares three versions of the same scanned image. The first is the uncropped image directly as it came out of the scanner. The next image results from using AutoCropper with settings of 2 and 2% for sensitivity and overcrop, respectively. Because the slide was slightly crooked in the scanner, a little sliver of black border remains in the upper right of the cropped image. So the original image is reprocessed with a larger overcrop of 4%, while keeping border detection sensitivity at 2 to eliminate this sliver. Of course, this action also removes a few pixels from other edges as well. Note that unlike more advanced programs, AutoCropper does not allow slight rotations to correct tilt in the original scan, nor does it allow cropping each of the 4 sides of the image differently. For these and other sophisticated edits, a program like Photoshop, OpenView, etc. will be required. As mentioned earlier, the AutoCropper program can perform a few other geometric edits besides cropping. In fact, these all relate to the orientation of images, which is relevant to almost all users regardless of whether or not they care about cropping. If all scanned slides were properly placed in the slide carousel or tray, no change in orientation of the images would be needed, except for 90-degree rotation of photos that were taken originally in portrait orientation, but of necessity scanned in landscape direction, which will be our first example. The top edge of this portrait photo points to the left, hence it needs to be rotated by 90 degrees clockwise. Unfortunately, the program doesn't describe rotation direction as clockwise or counterclockwise. So if we simply choose 90 degrees as a guess, then we end up with the upside-down photo seen here. Obviously, we need to go back and choose the opposite direction of rotation. Since there is no listing for negative 90 degrees, we choose 270 degrees, which means exactly the same thing. The result confirms our second choice. Note that because we have kept the original in a different folder than the edited image, that is, the rotated image, we were able to go back to the original and re-rotate it. This is better than rotating the edited image by 180 degrees to achieve the same final orientation, because that incurs an additional unnecessary save of the JPEG image, twice to be exact, which subtly adds JPEG artifacts with each save. In fact, this principle applies to performing all of the edits that the program is capable of in a single processing session, rather than serially editing a JPEG image over and over. For example, if an image needs rotation and border cropping, do that in a single session of AutoCropper. If, after editing an image, you find that it needs further geometric adjustments, reprocess the original by including that step in the processing rather than editing the edited image. However, if adjustments outside the limited capabilities of the AutoCropper program are needed, such as tone or brightness adjustments in Photoshop, for instance, then you must accept the slight degradation of the JPEG image resulting from resaving it twice, once in AutoCropper and once in Photoshop. Of course, an alternative is to use Photoshop, IrfanView, or your preferred image editing program to perform all of the edits in a single session, including the geometric adjustments, thus avoiding AutoCropper altogether. Naturally, TIFF images do not suffer from sequential editing and resaving in various programs because TIFF does not typically use lossy compression, as explained earlier in this video. AutoCropper allows two other types of orientation adjustments, which are needed for images of slides that were not oriented properly in the carousel or stacking tray at the time of scanning. As mentioned in the first SlideSnap video, there is one orientation mistake that software cannot correct, which is to scan slides in portrait orientation, since that would not capture the entire slide. But all other orientation mistakes can be corrected in software, provided that users understand these controls. The first example shows a scan of a slide that was left in the proper orientation for showing the image on a screen using the Kodak carousel projector as initially intended. Because that is not the proper orientation for scanning, users must either flip every slide before scanning or simply flip them in a program like AutoCropper. Frankly, the software method is much easier than manually flipping every slide. To do so in AutoCropper, simply choose the flip button shown here, and the result is a properly oriented image. Note that the small icon immediately to the left of the flip button depicts a small triangular image being reflected top to bottom. For this and other examples, I have turned off all cropping so as to focus on the orientation adjustment, but users may choose to exercise both of these actions at the same time when processing images. Note that another way to upright the image, rotating by 180 degrees, would be incorrect in the situation demonstrated here. As seen in the right-hand example, although the sky appears at the top as expected, careful examination shows that the resulting image is wrong in the left-to-right orientation. This is because the original slide orientation problem was twofold. 1, the image was upside down, and 2, the slide's emulsion was facing the camera rather than the glossy side facing the camera. Flipping the image upside down in AutoCropper automatically corrects both of these errors. Rotating by 180 degrees corrects only one of these two errors. Of course, if the original slide had only one orientation error, such as the skyward direction pointing downward, but the correct side of the slide, the glossy side, was pointing at the camera, then rotating by 180 degrees would be the proper correction, and flipping the image would be the wrong choice. This presents users with an interesting dilemma when examining slides before scanning. Though it is easy to determine which edge should face up based on the image, it can be difficult sometimes to distinguish the glossy side of the film from the slightly duller emulsion side, especially for inexperienced users. Therefore, we need a simpler way to determine if slides were scanned with the wrong side facing the camera, thus requiring software correction. Fortunately, in some cases this is very easy. A properly scanned slide image, or one that was properly reoriented in software after scanning, should always end up correct in both the top to bottom orientation and in the left to right orientation. Given that top to bottom is almost always trivial to identify, only left to right misorientation must concern us. For any image of a scene in which the original left to right orientation is known, the final adjustment is also trivial. For example, consider the result when the slide is loaded incorrectly for scanning by having the emulsion side face the camera, but with the correct vertical orientation, meaning the sky points up. If the photo includes any letters or numbers, such as a street address or a car license, then an image with incorrect left to right orientation stands out like a sore thumb. Even more subtle hints can provide the answer, such as which side of a vehicle's interior has the steering wheel, which president is on the left at Mount Rushmore, which side of your childhood home had the driveway, and so forth. Fixing that error is easy by flipping the image horizontally, which is called flop in autocropper. But many photos have no such intrinsic clues, so how to handle that? Well, if users are somewhat organized, as encouraged in a later section of this video, they will probably be scanning slides from the same original batch at the same time. For example, if I had a set of Kodachrome slides whose cardboard mounts had imprinted the same development date, the same film type, and developing business, and were sequentially numbered, it would be a good assumption that all these originated from the same roll of film. Thus, if just one of these slides had an image with an orientation clue like those mentioned, the problem is solved for the entire batch of slides from that roll. As a reference, place the slide containing the orientation clue in the carousel in the proper position, that is, top of a landscape photo pointing up and proper left to right orientation when viewed by the camera. Or equally good, if that reference slide is oriented for projection rather than for scanning, merely note that position. In either case, make sure that all other slides from the same batch are oriented in the same way as the reference slide, looking only at the cardboard slide mounts, not the images themselves. This should ensure that all slides from the same roll are properly oriented, or that they all need the same reorientation in autocropper after scanning. A word of caution: do not try to infer proper orientation of one roll of slides from another roll of slides. Different developers may imprint the cardboard or plastic slide mounts differently. Finally, we repeat that all slides originally photographed in portrait orientation will need an extra step in autocropper to turn the image by 90 or 270 degrees, depending on how the camera was originally held for the photo. A group of slide images from the same roll of film that have been oriented identically, but incorrectly for scanning, may be processed as a batch in autocropper, which is much faster than reorienting them one at a time. Of course, all portrait images will have to be processed separately from the others, starting with the original scans, not any processed images. Most photos or slides to be copied have accumulated an abundant amount of dust and similar debris over the years that impair the quality of scanned images. Thus, many methods of reducing this artificial noise have been developed to much benefit. Some methods rely on special scanner hardware, while others are only software-based. But truthfully, the best method of noise reduction is to carefully clean the photos and slides before scanning. Eliminating most of the dust ahead of time is always preferable to dealing with it during scanning and afterwards. Although almost no photos are likely to be in perfect condition at scan time, doing the best you can to avoid dust problems is better than trying to mitigate them later. Of course, many old photos have permanent scratches and defects that cannot be corrected, nor should you try to, before scanning. So image manipulation in software is the only recourse. The library keeps a few cleaning tools on hand for dust removal, including camel hair brushes and compressed air. Do not be overly aggressive in cleaning attempts, as the physical media of your photos could be damaged. Certainly avoid at all costs using inappropriate methods on your pictures, such as shirt sleeves, paper toweling, and other coarse fabrics, as well as blowing with your breath or holding a can of compressed air too close to the photo. The best-known hardware-based method of removing the image of dust that still remains on the photos to be scanned is called digital ice. The software behind this method cannot function unless the scanner includes the necessary hardware as well. Furthermore, it doesn't work with all types of film, nor does it work with scanning prints. For this reason, we will concentrate on purely software methods of dust removal, which in most cases works almost as well, and doesn't care which type of media was scanned, slides, negatives, or prints. Software dust removal works by detecting the imperfections in the image due to dust and replacing those pixels in the image with what it thinks they would be if the dust had not been present, based on pixels nearby in the image. Since this is not an exact science, irregularities in the image might arise from pixels misidentified as dust or similar abnormal circumstances. For this reason, users may wish to spend time examining a few scans at the start to see if dust removal should be enabled in the scanning software and how aggressive the removal should be. Our program should remain at a default of dust removal left on at a setting of medium. This next topic is called black and white is not necessarily what you think it is. Everyone recognizes photographs as being either color or black and white, though the latter was the only choice until color film first appeared commercially during the 1930s. Of course, previously, some black and white images were retouched with color pigments by hand, but those are called colored photographs rather than color photographs, because the hand-applied pigments do not depend on the actual colors of the subjects in the photos, and thus may be inaccurate. Although the subject of color in scanned images can go pretty deep, topics like color bit depth, color spaces, etc., that is not the focus of our attention here. Rather, it is so-called black and white images that we address now. I say so-called black and white because its meaning in photography is not the same as its meaning in the realm of digital images. For reasons that will become evident shortly, always scan black and white photos as grayscale, not as black and white. Consider this scan of a 100-year-old black and white photo. Although many people might call this a black and white image, just like the photo from which it came, in the world of digital imaging, it is known as a grayscale image. To understand this, consider what this same scan looks like when represented as a truly black and white image. Obviously, not what anyone wants. To get slightly technical, each pixel of the first image can be represented as an 8-bit number, meaning that each pixel can exist in one of 256 possible shades of gray, all the way from pure black up to pure white, and many shades in between, hence the name grayscale. The black and white image, on the other hand, has only 2 possible values for each pixel, black or white. Although starting with the grayscale image we could always produce a black and white copy from it, the reverse is not true. If all we have to start with is the black and white image on the right, we could never recover the grayscale image on its left from it. Of course, black and white images require much less storage space than grayscale images, but that is certainly no reason to accept such a poor rendering of our precious family photos. So even though grayscale images are larger than black and white images, they are still much smaller than color images, which we routinely use to store modern photos. Another benefit of grayscale images is that, like their color counterparts, but unlike digital black and white images, they can be adjusted after the scan to improve brightness and contrast of the original. Consider this next photo, which appears much worse than the first photo, despite both apparently being taken near the same time, judging by clothing and surroundings. Whether this second photo suffered because it was originally underexposed or because the photo print aged worse than the first photo, we have no way of knowing. But regardless of the reason, because it was scanned as a grayscale, the image was able to be improved after the scan. Even though the appearance of the corrected image is still somewhat inferior to the scan of the good photo, all would agree that the correction was very beneficial. Note that even if the original document, a text page for example, consists of only black and white pigment originally, it may still be wise to scan it as grayscale in order to manipulate the brightness before converting to black and white if you wish. An example is shown here of a scanned census page from FamilySearch.org. Being difficult to read in its original exposure, adjustment of brightness and contrast greatly improves the legibility of this grayscale image. Finally, it should be noted that there is nothing wrong with scanning black and white photographs as color images if you wish, but it will create much larger files than if they were stored as grayscale. One situation that may influence your decision is if you like the aged or sepia tone look of some of your black and white photos, you may elect to scan them as color in order to keep that brownish hue. But know that even if you scan old photos as grayscale, thus losing any brown tones they may have, such a sepia look can be artificially imposed on those images by software manipulation after the fact, though the grayscale files would have to be converted into color images before applying the sepia effect. Of course, this is artificial in that the tone and intensity of brown bears no relationship to the original photograph, unless the image editor used the original as a guide to approximate the artificial hue, as seen here in this pair of photos. Because scanners are usually defaulted to perform color scans, users will need to change settings if wishing to scan in grayscale. Such controls differ among scanning programs for the various scanners, so users need to check instructions for each scanner's software. In fact, The SlideSnap's Nikon camera only delivers color images, either JPEG or RAW, so users would need to convert the color files into grayscale image with Earphone View or another program if they want to save storage space. This section of the video touches on topics of annotation, organization, and naming schemes for image files, including numbering. Because there are so many ways to approach this, and proponents of various methods, this video will not attempt to identify the best approach. Rather, it will encourage users to give some thought to these issues before embarking on extensive episodes of photo scanning, and it will show a few tools that might prove helpful to some users, as well as some pitfalls to avoid. Most users face mountains of old family photos tucked away in shoeboxes or stored in slide reels, which can be rather daunting. Although it is tempting to immediately begin scanning as many as possible right away, it may be prudent to first think about how you want to locate, access, and identify these digital images once they are stored on your computer or in the cloud. After settling on your own scheme, consider scanning just a few dozen images initially to see how all the steps of your workflow meet your expectations. Most people agree that equally important to the image itself is the information about who or what is shown in the picture. After all, a precious photo of your great-grandfather loses most of its value if subsequent generations have no idea as to the identity of the person in that photo. This data about the image file can be called metadata, meaning that it is data about the image data. In fact, most digital images from cameras already carry some metadata within the image file itself. But this metadata mostly centers around photographic equipment or technical settings pertinent to the image. For example, some fields, that is sections, of the metadata might describe what model camera took the photo, what camera settings were used, like shutter speed, aperture, etc., the date and time of image capture, and so forth. Some modern cameras even record the location where the photo was taken based on GPS location within the camera. Well, for family history purposes, these types of metadata are mostly unimportant. What matters to us is approximately when and where the original picture was taken, not when it was scanned, what event might have occasioned the photo, and most importantly, who are the persons in the photo and what relationship they had to each other. Unfortunately, the standard defined fields of metadata don't fit with these categories of information, although some metadata fields are initially left blank, so they may be filled later with whatever info the owner wishes to put there. If users are interested in this approach, they must research which programs allow adding comments, descriptions, tags, etc. to files. Another approach is to embed some of this information into the file name that the user chooses. For example, a file might be named Smith Family Reunion 1965-001.jpg or something like that, but that doesn't do much to identify the individuals shown in a large group photo, even if Grandma knew who they all were before her death took that information with her. Although some photos might lend themselves to providing sufficient information in the file name itself, such as John and Jane Doe Wedding, 21st September 1927.jpg, others become intractably long if many people must be identified or other lengthy information must be included in the file name. Another approach is to keep a log of all scanned photos in a spreadsheet like Excel or a database. This certainly has the advantage of being able to record as much detailed information as desired about each picture, and it can be added in stages as that information is gathered from those acquainted with the original photo long after the file was named. Despite many advantages, a significant disadvantage of this approach is that critical information about each photo is contained in a file separate from the image file itself. If that log is lost or permanently separated from the image photos, all that information is lost. For that reason, this approach should probably only be considered by those having an automated backup process to the cloud or elsewhere to keep a copy of this log and related photos. Of course, some online family history sites allow uploading of images with the ability for viewers to add personal information about each of them, including identities of individuals. If you are comfortable using that as your only means of image annotation, this certainly is easy. Another aspect to consider is how your image files will be stored on your computer and/or in the cloud. Will image files be stored alongside whatever other documents you keep about your family history? Or will you create a directory consisting of only family history photos, organized some way with a subordinate directory structure? Will you use an automatic backup program to avoid loss when your primary drive crashes? Notice I said when, not if. Regardless of which organizational structure you adopt, there will possibly be many files with a common initial base name, followed by a sequence number before the period and file extension that follow. For example, if 20 photos of the Burlando family were scanned, they might be named Burlando_001.jpg, Burlando_002.jpg, and so forth. Unfortunately, unless the photos were extremely well sorted, organized, and complete before the first image was scanned, a nearly impossible task. The sequence number in the set of files represents the order of scanning, not the chronological order of the original photography. This is another reason why a database or record of estimated picture date is important for your photos. In fact, some people may not choose to embed any particular information within the file name itself other than the sequence of scanning. Since the order of scanning is not relevant to the content of the image file itself, for example, one day you may be scanning your paternal photos and the next your maternal photos, this absolutely requires a method to keep track of them. One naming and numbering scheme merely begins each year with a new scanning sequence, in this case the 4-digit year, followed by the acronym SC to represent scan. The first image scanned that year is 2020 SC0001 and increments by 1 with each new scan. An Excel log corresponding to this scheme allows focusing on just those files meeting a certain criteria, for instance, those with the word Burlando in the description. When the new year, 2021, begins, the names will start with 2021 SC0001 again. This brings up a caution about one common pitfall: starting the numbering at 1 without the leading zeros necessary to make all numeric values among a set of file names contain the same number of digits. An example of this pitfall is illustrated by a list of 22 fictitious files called file_, followed by a number 1 to 22. These file names have been sorted alphabetically in Excel, and the results clearly do not fall within numerical order. For example, file_10, meaning 10 of course, appears well before file_2 because the numeral 1 precedes the numeral 2 in the computer alphabet. Although users can insert Excel calculations to achieve the desired sort order, this workaround is clearly an undesirable burden. And many other programs will also produce this same undesired order upon sorting, including older versions of Windows Explorer, now called File Explorer. Though File Explorer and newer versions of Windows can sort these file names as desired if a system parameter is properly configured, Excel and some other programs, including Google Sheets, still do it the other way, so the inconsistency may annoy some users. An easy alternative is to use the same number of digits for all numeric values, such as the example at the right, where file numbering starts with 01, 02, etc. In this case, all programs, regardless of type or vintage, arrange these files in proper sequence using alphabetical sorting. To recap, this recommendation for the same number of digits in all related file names means that some numbers will have leading zeros. The number of digits determines how many distinct files can exist under the same naming scheme, which you must decide ahead of time. For this simple example, only 2 digits were utilized, but that limits its usage to 99 files. So perhaps 3 digits or even 4 digits may be preferred depending on circumstances. But you can't start out with 3 digits, for example, and then switch to 4 digits upon reaching file number 1000. That would create the same problem sorting that we set out to avoid. Using the same number of digits ensures that alphabetical sorting always yields the proper order. On the other hand, eliminating leading zeros does have the advantage of not having to decide ahead of time the maximum number of similarly named files, but it will cause sorting problems in some circumstances. Another issue with file names that causes similar problems occurs when dates occupy part of the file names. For example, if file names share common text at the beginning and include dates afterwards, the format of dates is very important if you wish to sort in chronological order. This slide shows examples of 12 files with dates ranging from the last century to the present, using a different date format in each list of file names. The format determines the order of sort, even though the same 12 dates are represented in each list. For example, the earliest date is the 2nd of May, 1932, whereas the most recent date is the 10th of November, 2017. Among the different date formats, only the last one sorts in chronological order. That is because it starts with year, then numeric month, followed by day, always using 4 digits for the year and 2 each for the month and day. Note that the commonly preferred date format in genealogy, which is day, then month, spelled, not numbered, then year, does not sort chronologically. Before family history enthusiasts come after me with pitchforks and torches, realize that I'm only pointing out the sorting consequences of date formats, not telling users what they must do. For some people, sorting order may be unimportant. Though all three of these date formats can be sorted in chronological order within Excel, that only applies to pure dates, that is, dates without the accompanying text characters that will always be present in file names. But file names that use the suggested date format will always sort chronologically in Excel, File Explorer, or any other program that does alphabetical sorting. But regardless of which format people use if they embed dates in file names, entries in genealogy programs or websites should always use the date format specified by them. Those who are concerned with sorting order should remember that the portion of text in the file name that precedes the date must be identical among files in order to sort chronologically with the proper date format. For example, if you had files named John Doe birth date, John Doe marriage date, and John Doe death date, the alphabetical order in File Explorer would not be chronological because death comes before marriage in the alphabet. On the other hand, if you chose to name these files John Doe followed by date, then by event, they would appear chronologically in File Explorer or anywhere else. A final caution relevant to sorting file names that include numbers or dates is to avoid inconsistencies in the non-numeric parts of the names. This example uses the same two-digit numbers in file names as those shown earlier, except that these names have inconsistent choices for the character between the text word file and the number that follows. Some names use the underscore character, others a hyphen, others a space, and finally some place the number directly after the text with no character in between. As seen here, the list is not in numerical order after sorting in Excel because of these inconsistencies, nor would they be ordered properly in File Explorer. The benefits of consistency in naming are not limited to sorting only. For example, if you wanted to search or filter in Excel for all files beginning with the name photo underscore 2020, any files accidentally named photo hyphen 2020 would not be found. We close this topic by reminding viewers that there are many more considerations in naming files and folders besides just the sorting order, including possible aspects not mentioned within this video. You are encouraged to think carefully about this, including searching online if you are so inclined, in order to settle on a system that works for you. So after deciding on a file name scheme, how do you implement it for your scanned photos? While most scanning programs have some type of user control over the automatic naming and numbering of their scans, the methods and options available vary greatly from one program to another. The locations within these programs to set those options also vary greatly and can be obscure. Further complicating the issues is that you are sharing a scanner over time with multiple other users who certainly have their own naming preferences, and if you do manage to change the program settings, they will remain so for others unless they also know how to change them. For these reasons, the library recommends not changing these settings. Of course, after scanning, users could rename individual files to their own name preference, one at a time. However, that is unacceptably tedious, so batch renaming programs are the only logical alternative. Although many such programs can be downloaded from the web at little or no cost, we will demonstrate a very capable program called Advanced Renamer that is installed on one of the library's computers. Upon opening Advanced Renamer, the main part of the screen shows files to be renamed. Of course, since no files have yet been added to the list, it is blank. I now add files by clicking the Add button under the Rename Files tab, which allows me to navigate to the location of the files I want renamed. Cautious users may have backed up these files previously to another folder in case they make errors with this program. However, Advanced Renamer has features to avoid mistakes and even correct them if they do occur, which will be demonstrated shortly, so backups may not be necessary. I select all files within this folder, though I just as easily could have chosen them all by selecting the directory containing them. Note that directory is just another name for folder. The right-hand side of the panel gives the full path to each of the files listed. It is not necessary that all files in a batch reside within the same directory, although that will usually be the case. However, it is essential that all files in a batch have a common name format so that the rules for renaming are applied consistently. In this example, the original name of each file is SSP _, followed by a 4-digit sequential number starting with 1572, representing the original order of scanning. The two issues we want rectified with new names are: 1. Although SSP stands for SlideSnap Pro, we have no interest in retaining that for our new names. Instead, we wish to refer to this set of files as Burlando, followed by a number. 2. The earliest file in scanning order is number 1572, but we wish to start it at 1. Advanced Renamer makes these two changes very easy by adding two methods to the batch process, selected from this pull-down menu under Add Method. The first method we choose is called Replace, which immediately appears in the list of selected methods with its customizable fields. First, enter next to text to be replaced the characters SSP, and then enter Burlando next to replace with. Immediately, we see the preview in the main pane of what this method will do to the file names once the batch is eventually processed. However, before processing, we need to add another method that will replace the numbers in the file names. In the first field, we state the position of the number, referring to the order in which numbers and file names appear. For example, if our original file names each had multiple numbers, such as a scanning batch number and a sequence number, separated by one or more non-numeric characters, we could use this field to tell the program which one of these two numbers to change in each file name. But since our file names contain only one number each, we will leave this parameter at 1. We leave this next parameter as an absolute number, and then enter the number to appear in the first file of our renamed list. In this case, I will leave it at 1, but users could choose a higher number if other renamed files with these same numbers already exist. The next field, called Skip, remains at 1, and zero padding stays at manual with a number length of 3. Observe the list that previews all the new file names, which start with Burlando _001.jpg. Upon noticing that the length of each number is 3 digits, I can change this to fewer or more digits as desired back in my renumber method. I will put it at 4 instead. Note that the number of digits in the renamed files does not have to match the number of digits in the original file names. The preview list of renamed files allows users to experiment with different settings to observe the effect of each without actually changing any file names. Once you are satisfied with the new names as previewed, simply click Start Batch to make the actual changes. If you made a mistake in renaming files, simply choose the menu option Undo Previous Batch at the top before proceeding further or quitting the program. Users are free to examine the many other methods of renaming by experimenting on their own using test case sample files, of course. This concludes the second video on topics related to SlideSnap Pro, in addition to other scanners in the library. We welcome any feedback or suggestions from our patrons.